The God King rises. I suppose some people are just not meant to be helped. The Orange tribe has always been subjugated by marauding, foreign tribes. It's easy to see why. They occupy a rich delta. Every single year, the narrow spit of land they live in welcomes a new, rich, silk deposit from the ever-generous river that surrounds it. Every single year without fail, Orange tribe farmers can reliably look forward to bumper crops. All too often the surrounding kingdoms would face famine and the resulting disasters. Kingdoms come crashing down. Hungry invaders from the north or east storm in to take up whatever scraps of supplies their unlucky victims were able to store away. But not the Orange lands. This relatively thin strip of land, cut up into different fiefdoms, each with their own egotistical religious rulers, has managed to keep their inhabitants' bellies full. Year after year, rich grain overflows from the green fields that seem to stretch forever. Their baked clay granaries, some often reaching high into the sky, seem to overflow with the earth's bounty. Of course, such a rich harvest affords the local rulers access to the very best mercenaries from all four corners of the known world. From the tall purple tribe of the south come giants with broad shields and hungry swords. From the east come the mighty archers, able to knock down even the fastest and most elusive quarry, both man or beast. Given such mercenary forces, it quickly becomes obvious to any visitor to these Orange lands that the Orange leaders and the people that followed them only had one real enemy: themselves. United, they could withstand whatever storm manages to blow from the seas or across the sand to the west. They've also held off for hundreds of years marauding, steel-clad, seemingly invincible warriors from the rich river basins of the south. But just like with any overfed region, the Orange lands have slowly given in to delusion. Just judging from how many of its local rulers tend to overextend themselves, it has become quite obvious that they have let their success against the others get to their heads. They have become too confident in their own ability to put off the inevitable. And sure enough, the king of the West Orange lands, having forcefully bent the knees of every local cleric and other self-proclaimed man-god, set his restless eyes on the east. The east, of course, is the gateway to the rest of the delta that empties the ever-generous river that the Orange lands sit on to the rest of the world. The Western king understood that once he brings the east to heel, the world will open up to him and his ambitions. And why not? After all, isn't it orange swords, shields, and chariots that have held off the very best weaponry and armies that the outside world could muster for all these hundreds of years? It is time for the Orange Kingdom, unified finally under his obviously enlightened guidance, to open the rest of the world's eyes to truly superior technology and the one true way to meet the gods. Just like with any preparation for the Western King's movements, it hardly escaped detection. The Eastern King, more of a figurehead propped up by the real rulers of this part of the Orange lands, the priests, was well briefed. Sitting in the bowels of the massive, triangular fortress he called home, complete with its 40 stories of subterranean tunnels, the Eastern King almost drifts off to sleep amidst the deep-throated, meditative hums of dozens of shaved monks exploring the dream world with their chants. Arranged in a semicircle around the designated God King, each monk who was wearing robes of various hues blending indistinguishably from each other in the dim light of the God King's vast, subterranean hall, slowly gripped the wooden beads in the right hands, their chants following a common rhythm, each imploration and supplication and hum occasioning a turn of a prayer bead. The fragile faint smell of incense wafts through the room, seemingly gliding on the thick hums made by the priests and monks. God King Nanamo, the herald's voice shatters the seemingly impregnable meditative wall and matching incensed fog that filled the chamber. The Western King is fast approaching. His soldiers cannot be counted. We need your help. The God King was ready for such a scene as this. He knew the real value and meaning of his title. The real God Kings, if they were to exist, are the men surrounding him and the men they represent, faceless yet all too obvious. These are the real powers of the Eastern lands. They walk amongst the people, informing and strengthening them with their encouragement of vague words from the unknown. The God King Nanamo understood that in a land choking on superstition, it is precisely the unknowable that holds the strings to the power of what can be seen. Clearing his throat, he musters enough of the necessary ceremonial gravitas befitting his title. Slowly, he stands up, catching with the corner of his eyes the slow movements of the men surrounding him. He felt the heaviness of their thinly disguised stares, and he can sense the breaths that they were holding back as they strained to listen to his words. The crown resting on his head has been passed on through several men. In fact, it has been passed on quite frequently. Nanamo knew how unstable the God King's position is in a land full of ambitious priests. After all, he was one of them. It's as if it was just yesterday he was passing in his drab robes, collecting the food alms that worshipful villagers insist he must eat. For every step he took at the market square, it seemed that somebody had food to put in his bowl. It's quite a miracle that Nanamo didn't succumb to the common weakness he sees in the men surrounding him and all the other priests in the eastern lands. He didn't have a gut. Maybe that's the reason he got this dubious promotion to God King. Maybe they viewed his muscular physique as a manifestation of an iron will. Ironically, this is precisely the kind of iron will that such overfed men feared in each other. They knew the game. The best way to be destroyed is to be promoted to God King. Still, Nanamo felt and gave in to the heaviness of his responsibility, not just to these rapacious, exploitative, glorified magicians and spiritual con men, but also to his family. As God King, he knew that his choices will eventually mean life or death to everyone, including his own clan. Drawing in a deep, he stood erect. His muscular frame glistened like dark bronze, backlit by flickering votive candles, lit by the fat men at the bottom of the soapstone pedestal that held his throne. It is my turn to sacrifice for the Orange Lands. The gods have given me their word. They will send fire from within to clear away this latest incursion from the pretenders. As heavy as his words may have felt to him, he also knew that this was the exact same speech as the previous God King. God Kings, interestingly enough, only had two destinies once they faced such a challenge as this: disappearance or death. Understanding the death of a God King elevated by the priestly class of the Orange Eastern Lands doesn't take much work. A pestilence of violent tribes from the east or sophisticated seaborne marauders from the north with their unquenchable blades can almost be relied on to cut short the life of any man unfortunate enough to hold the soapstone throne of the Eastern Lands. Heralds speak of the bravery of the sacrifice of these men. But what Nanamo cannot quite understand are the disappearances. These are the God Kings who against all odds delivered the Eastern Orange Lands from what seems like certain annihilation, and yet they disappeared. Regardless of whether they vanished or were cut down amidst an orgy or bloodletting and agonizing sacrifice, Nanamo understood that he has to stick to the script. This is all part of a ritual. When an enemy arises, it doesn't matter whether it comes from the east, north, west, or most terrifyingly from the south. He is to say the same script handed down over the millennia. Just as the river overflows to lay rich silk year after year, decade after decade, century after century, every single God King kept to the script, and now it is his turn. At the back of his mind, he longs for one final embrace of his daughter and his wife. Still, he understood that it was too late. He already took this exalted position. They are already taken care of, living in opulence in an upper chamber. And just like any other royal family displaced by the rise of a new God King, they understood that they will live out the rest of their lives without having to worry about anything. Stealing his focus, he drew his arms out in ritual acceptance of the challenge. The overweight men surrounding him deepened their chants. A wall of sounds seems to emanate from the bottom of the pedestal and surround him with an invisible kind of awe. Long live the God King. Long live the sacrifice for victory. This chant repeated as each attendant fitted Nanamo with the very best bronze armor this part of the known world could muster. With its thick, intricate designs and swiveling joints, the full body armor made him shine like a newly forged bronze man of war. The God King awaits. On to victory! The herald repeated his own pre-programmed proclamation, and with those words, the main entrance of the chamber opened, revealing dagger-sharp shafts of light. Piercing the room, the light channeled through precisely angled sets of mirrors from the surface of the fortress filled the chamber. Faint drum beats crept in through the stone walls as Nanamo quickly led his entourage of assembled holy warriors and monk knights to the waiting war party, assembled in the city's main square. No sooner had he set foot over the fortress's threshold to see his face bathed with the unforgiving rays of the desert sun from the west that a loud cloud of sound swiftly rose from the vast square directly in front of the fortress. All hail the God King! The Orange Lands rejoice with yet another victory. His immediate lieutenants, the captains of the guard, and the real power behind the army said in unison, "All hail Nanamo, the great God King of the Eastern Lands. Lead us to the victory that the gods have promised since the forging of time." And with that grand proclamation, the battle horses and chariots appeared seemingly out of the sand as the hydraulic platforms flanking the square slowly unloaded their cargo. In what seemed like a mere moment, the army, many of them were men barely out of their teens, were neatly lined up in formation, waiting for a signal to march out of the square and head west to deal with yet another upstart king his much-deserved humiliation. To victory! Nanamo yells, mustering as much royal majesty as his imagination allowed him. To victory! Yelled back the crowd. Men and women as well as the elderly, banging pots and pans, children banging random pieces of metal against any hard object they could find. The clamor aimed at giving the gathered army with their razor-like swords and thick shields the internal fire they need to bring home the only thing that matters. Victory. Pretty soon, the square emptied itself of the thousands of soldiers that it contained, riding steadily on top of a chariot with one charioteer grappling the reins and a backup charioteer. Immediately behind him was Nanamo. The gods await. Nanamo finally recites the last line of the script he has rehearsed decades since he was groomed for his role. And with that shout in what seemed like an instant, the army found itself face to face with the king of the West. The Western Army, a hodgepodge collection of peasants, mercenaries, religious zealots turned warriors and professional soldiers, seemed to be repeating an age-old curse. Armies that came from the West almost always broke apart before even clashing with their Eastern rivals. And why shouldn't they? The Western Orange Lands have always been divided, not just among those who had no money and those with a little bit to their name, but also among the kind of gods they believe in and those who didn't believe in a deity. The newly arrived often chafed at the constant bullying and hectoring of those who happened to arrive hundreds of years earlier. To say that the Western armies formed a united, invincible clenched fist of righteous anger at the East would be laughable. Even Nanamo, having been locked away in the pomp and mysterious rituals and traditions of the underground chambers of the central fortress of the God King, knew this. But like a tragic actor insistent on going through his lines, knowing full well that the end cannot be changed and that his destiny is sealed, every single new king in the West that arose after years, if not decades, of backbiting, betrayal, even fratricide, all shared this common look of hopefulness in their eyes. Maybe this time, the Western curse will be broken. Knowing this, Nanamo cannot be faulted for having a slight smile on his face. Perhaps it's a confident smirk. Maybe he meant it. He meant to grin partially to stave off any insecurities or fears for his family. But anybody who understood the West and how they've always crashed against the East, even with what seemed like the weight and power of the world armed with the latest steel and or bronze, always managed to smash into what seemed like an infinite number of pieces. The army's herald is up ahead. The lieutenant relayed the information. Nanamo descended from his horse, keeping his posture perfectly straight. He knew that every signal that he sends can either weaken or strengthen the resolve of his army. The Western Herald was not what he was expecting. Nanamo was looking forward to the dashing, if not cocky visage of yet another ill-fated emissary of a campaign that is doomed to fail. He didn't see that in Aswari. Oh, God King of the endless oceans and the vast, innumerable sands of East and West, God King, who is destined since the times of the Southern Kings, hear me. I bring word from the wisdom of the West. For a second, Aswari's sweet words almost got to Nanamo. Gesturing with his hand, he signaled the emissary to talk. I do not represent the king and the king of the West and his ill-fated fool's mission. Instead, I seek your audience on behalf of the army, well, at least the captains. Nanamo's smirk quickly grew into an obvious smile, and he wasn't alone. He can sense the changed moods of the metal-decked captains and lieutenants surrounding him. "Do go on." He could barely suppress his words. He knew he wasn't supposed to talk and just gesture, but he couldn't control himself. He's hoping against hope that this is not viewed as weakness, not by Aswari, who will probably be dead by the end of the day, but by the dangerous men surrounding him. "Aswari, we propose a sacrifice. We will meet you at battle, but upon your signal, the main troops will withdraw. Do whatever you will with whoever is left." Nanamo: "And what do you want in return?" Aswari: "To be left in peace. We know the West has tried many times in history to take what it has no right to. We apologize for yet another episode of this long, historic, and painfully repeating insolence. I only ask that you allow us to withdraw in peace. And should anything happen to me or to those I represent, then you have my word that the endless cycle of war will not be broken today." Gesturing to the men surrounding him, Nanamo fell into the familiar ritual of consulting his advisors and war chiefs. This, of course, is just a farce. It is his call to make. He is the God King, the holy sacrifice. There is only one answer. It is acceptable, and he knew it. Still, he gestured. Aswari left his sight to go into a tent, and Nanamo and the leading men and warriors and commanders convened in another tent far away. Nobody spoke. It's as if it's a one-man show. Everybody knew the drill. Nanamo is supposed to make up some expiring speech on the spot, but the conclusion has been set in stone since time has been recorded. "We will destroy the army in front of us, whether they withdraw or not. But any withdrawal before the time of destruction will be honored." And true to the script, every single participant did not offer a word, but just nodded in agreement. Stepping boldly out of the tent and into Aswari's presence, the God King clasped his hands and said, "You have my word." It didn't take long for the word to manifest in bloody flesh and broken swords. The Eastern armies slammed hard against the raised shields and thrusting spears and spikes of the Western armies. As the Western mercenaries and their sad war slaves dug their hills, trying to punch through the seemingly impenetrable wall of bronze-clad Eastern Orange warriors, sunlight seems to fill the back section of the Western army as the cavalry, wagons, and the majority of their foot soldiers run away, seemingly in an infinite number of directions. After all, the West was never a singular kingdom but made up of many different tribes, clans, and bands. And just as these people were snatched up, smashed together, and forged in the blazing hot forge of an aspiring Western king's ambition, they also easily came violently apart. Nanamo can almost sense the hope vaporizing out of the eyes and mouths of the Western soldiers left in his midst. As the clashing of metal starts to die down, and the initial small streams of blood quickly grow into a stinking crimson river, the East knew it won. With one final shout, "For the God King!" The Eastern soldiers from both flanks swallowed up the remaining warriors of the West, much like a lamb thrown at a giant shark. The screams finally melted away with a final hammering and slashing sound of metal until all that was left is Nanamo and his mighty men of courage surrounding him in a half-circle. Behind him was a raid of what seemed like a massive thick sea of battle-clad men. And following the ancient script, Thoradin, his second in command, said the final words Nanamo will ever hear. "Although we are grateful to you for defeating our oppressors, you are meant to die in battle." As expected, his allies drew their swords. Thoradin held a different weapon made of obsidian. It seemed that this sword was made from one painstakingly precise blow. He knew what this weapon was designed for. "Here comes the ritual sacrifice of the previous God King. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten," Thoradin said as he wields the ceremonial God King decapitator, the exact same sword Nanamo held in his younger years. And with a curious mixture of both pride, defeat, and resignation, the tall, imposing, seemingly invincible God King kneeled to his knees and bowed forward to expose the back of his neck, the only vulnerable part of his otherwise steel-encased body. The God King decapitator goes down and a cry fills the battlefield, echoing all the way back to the Eastern Kingdom. "The God King is dead. Long live the God King."